Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. Are we blessed at Unity or what? Oh my goodness. This is one of those Sundays that all I get to do is show up and MC. I love it. It's fabulous. Let me tell you about our guest speaker. The Reverend Michael Dowd is a heart-centered eco-theologian and best-selling TEDx speaker. His book, Thank God for Evolution, was endorsed by 6 Nobel Prize-winning scientists and dozens of diverse religious leaders. Michael and his science writer and fellow climate activist wife, Connie Barlow, have spoken to 2,500 religious and secular groups across North America since 2002. 2,500. Their work was featured in the New York Times, the LA Times, the Washington Post, Discover Magazine, and on CNN, ABC News, and even on Fox News. What? All right. Reverend Dowd's passion is inspiring all of us to live as a blessing to future generations, as well as those we interact with daily. I want to tell you that I first was inspired by Michael Dowd. I was doing music at a conference in California, the Asilomar Conference, in we think 2006, 7, 8, somewhere in there. And I was so lit up by his love for our planet that it inspired me to step into it differently. He's just an amazing soul. I then had the chance to meet him. He and Connie were our guests and our presenters at the Big Sky Retreat a couple of years after that. I had him here for Wednesday Night Live. Reverend Howard had invited him even before I got here to be here on Sunday morning. His message has changed, it's deepened, it's more impassioned and more needed now than ever. Please open your hearts and give love to the Reverend Michael Dowd. Thank you. Give him heaven.
Thank you. So, whenever I speak on the same topic in 2 services, I know that there's always people that are at both services, and I want to keep things interesting. So the topic will continue, the title of my lesson is still Ecology as the Heart of Theology, but my hunch is about only 20% of it will be the same as I preached last service. So keeps it interesting for me too. We are living in a challenging time. I don't need to say that. We all know that. We feel it in our guts. We feel it in our bones. And I'm reminded, just last week, Connie and I, my wife and I, watched the movie Avatar. And I love it. It's just so symbolic, so heartful, so mythic. And there's that scene where Toruk Maktau unites the various tribes to come together. Now, of course, we have a spiritual battle to fight, but it's also against the forces of greed and self-centeredness that wish to take everything away from the future so that individuals and corporations can benefit in the present without any sense of responsibility, sacred responsibility to the future. And yet, just as in that movie, it was ultimately the forces of nature that stopped that, so too in our situation. It turns out that self-centeredness, individual human-centeredness, is itself self-terminating. It can't continue. Anything that is not aligned with God's ways, and I mean nature's ways, the ways of reality, cannot sustain. It can for short periods of time. We've seen that. The last several thousand years have largely been city-based, human-centered civilizations. We know of over 100 civilizations. Now, I'm just talking about the last 3% of humanity. The first 97% of our species, we lived more or less in a mutually enhancing relationship with primary reality. By primary reality, I mean everything that we depend upon to live and to thrive, which includes the air, the water, the soil, the life upon which we depend, and upon which our children and our grandchildren depend. For the first 97% of human history, we lived honoring primary reality as primary. And that is the definition of sustainability. It's being accountable to the future. It's saying that we don't today get to judge good and evil. We imagine what future generations would judge as good and evil, and we live accordingly. So this topic of ecology is the heart of theology. Turns out that that's what unites as one of the three things that unites every sustainable culture for which we have evidence. All cultures that didn't defile primary reality, all cultures that didn't foul their own nest, lived with ecology, that is the sciences of right relationship to the living world, as the heart of what we would today call theology. That is the heart of their spiritual life ways. So I want to speak about both that, but also this last 3% of humanity where we have had human-centered civilizations. We know of over 100 civilizations that progressed, became great, and regressed. We call it the rise and fall of civilizations. But there are over 100 examples around the world of civilizations that over 1 or 2 or 3 centuries become great, and over a half a century to 2 centuries become non-existent. And don't take my word on it. Just put BBC civilization. There was a major article in the BBC, a feature article just last month by Luke Kemp, and it was titled, "Are We on the Way to Civilizational Collapse?" And of course, he answered yes. And he had a chart that showed 88 civilizations from 3000 BC, that's 5,000 years ago, until 1,000 years ago. That 4,000-year period, there were 88 civilizations that did this. He didn't look back before 3,000 years, and he didn't look back just the last 1,000. So that's where we say there's well over 100. And we know the difference between sustainable and unsustainable. And you know, I'm sure all of you have seen The Lion King. One of my favorite phrases in that is, remember who you are. Remember who you are. And that's really that's how we can stay sane, sober, and inspired in crazy and contracting times. We have no control as individuals or even groups anymore over the contracting times. That's now out of our hands. There are certain climate tipping points that have already tipped. There are certain unsustainable practices that have become so severe that we are now living in the age of consequences. Not because some supernatural being outside the universe is pissed off at us, but because there are consequences when we live out of right relationship to reality. And those of you that have heard me speak before know that I use the word God and reality interchangeably. God is a mythic, proper, sacred I, thou name for what's fundamentally, undeniably, and inescapably real. Or you could say reality is God's secular name. Either way. And I've even begun spelling, because the word God has become so trivial for so many people. You know, a supreme landlord who resides off the planet and outside the universe, who's for this football team but not that football team, you know? This kind of trivial God. So I've even started spelling God either all caps, G-O-D, or even the Old English, the way that many nuns, Catholic nuns and feminists, and some neo-pagans are spelling God, G-O-D-D-E. God, G-O-D-D-E. It's the Old English spelling. What's nice about it is it's gender neutral. Reality is feminine-like. Reality is masculine-like. Reality is like a lot of things. So it's gender neutral, but also what we're meaning by God is reality with a personality, not a person outside reality. And it doesn't matter whether you believe in reality or not. Just doesn't. But you bet we need to live in right relationship to reality, or we suffer and struggle and perish, just like any other species. So what I want to speak briefly about this morning is thinking of the Lion King. The most important way to stay sane, sober, and inspired in crazy and contracting times is to remember who you are, where you are in time and space, why you are, and what matters most. So let's take a quick look at who we are, where we are in time and space, why we are, and what matters most. So, first of all, who are we? Well, in the unity tradition, we have a deeper, more ecologically grounded understanding of the divine and of ourselves. That God is not separate from us. We are not separate from God. We are part of the body of the divine. We are part of the body of reality. And we recognize that reality, power, presence, the oneness, the unity of reality is part of its sacredness, and we participate in that whether we're conscious of it or not. But when we forget it, when we lose consciousness of it, we struggle. And that's why I appreciated the prayer and the meditation so much. Because when we come into that, once again, that recognition that there is one power, one presence, one life, and it's the body of life that we participate in. That's, again, another thing that all indigenous, tribal, first peoples, sustainable cultures had in common, is a living God, not just an abstract God, an invisible God, but an understanding of the divine that wasn't merely invisible, although there are invisible elements to reality for sure, but that God, reality, was also blue, green, and brown and black, like the colors of life, the body of life. And so you know that a civilization is on the path to self-destruction when God is merely invisible and not also blue, green, and brown. So who are we? We are the universe becoming conscious of itself. We are literally the result of 13.8, let's round it off to 14 billion years of unbroken creativity. And we are that process become conscious of itself. The universe has been expanding and becoming more conscious, more self-aware. When the first eyes developed, that was the universe coming to see itself in a new way. It was the body of God coming to see, the body of life coming to see. The first ears, the first sense that could track vibrations of sound. All the senses are life, God, reality, the universe becoming aware of itself, more intimate with itself. And humans are not separate from that. We are life after 14 billion year universe. Let's take our Earth. We're, 4.5 billion years of unbroken evolution, and we are that process. So we're the Earth becoming conscious of itself. Brian Swimme, the physicist, cosmologist who worked very closely with my great mentor, Thomas Berry, he called himself a geologian. Not a theologian, a geologian, like a theologian of the Earth. But Brian Swimme has these two quotes that just help people just sort of get it. He says, 4 billion years ago, the Earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. Earth was once molten rock, and now it sings opera. And nobody put anything here. When the Bible, like Genesis 2:7, speaks of God forming us from the dust of the ground and breathing into us the breath of life, that's a true story. It's a mythic way of describing with personification that we grow out of the dynamics of the planet itself, and it's reality as a whole that makes that possible. Now, another quote from Brian Swimme that's a little audacious, but I like it. He says you can take the entire history of the universe and sum it up in 2 sentences. You take a great cloud of hydrogen gas and you just leave it alone. And it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings. Now, if that's not a sacred story that deserves to be honored and celebrated and ritualized, I don't know what is. So, know who you are. You are life becoming conscious of itself. You are part of the body of God. Where are we in time and space? Well, where we are in time, this is my cosmic rosary. Great story beats. It's the epic of evolution, big history, the universe story. It's the history of everyone and everything told in beads. So I have 270 of the major transformational moments in the history of everyone and everything in order with beads. And don't worry, I'm not going to go through every one of them. But I've got all of our different names for reality, and then the 4 fundamental forces and the Big Bang, and the early solar, the formation of the Milky Way galaxy, and then our sun, and on and on. And I've got all of these represented, including the scientific discoveries that have helped us come to understand that this is our sacred story. This is our common genesis. This is the story that unites all peoples and all species as one sacred story. So who we are in time is not at the end of time. Yes, though my last beads have to do with the last 100 years and our traveling ministry. But life continues. In fact, I've started using a cosmic 101-year timeline. If you start at the beginning of the universe as 1 second after midnight on January 1st of the year 0, at day 2, all the hydrogen was formed. The first 30 years or so, galaxies are being formed, and some of the bigger galaxies are gobbling up others, like our Milky Way. At age 67 on a 100-year timeline, is our solar system formed. At 69, Earth cooled below the boiling point of water, and it rained for eons, and all the oceans formed. At 71 is Earth comes alive with bacteria, and at 72, some of these bacteria start feeding on the photons of the sun. We call that photosynthesis. And then from 72 until now, which is December 31st of the 99th year, right at midnight, just about to go into the 100th year, at that time scale, right, we've got evolution. And do you know where human beings show up on a 100-year time scale? If the whole history of the universe is in 100 years, Homo habilis, walking upright, using stone tools, December 25th of the 99th year. Now, I think this is pretty cool. I didn't try to have this happen. This is just what happens when you can do the math yourself on a 100-year time scale. But God became human on Christmas Day of the 99th year. I think that's pretty cool, right? We domesticated fire on December 29th of the 99th year, and we've been speaking in words, symbolic language, where words point to a reality beyond what those words can capture on December 31st of the 99th year. In other words, we've been speaking Homo sapiens, the last 400,000 years is the last day on a 100-year process. Now, it doesn't stop there. We lived more or less sustainably. That is, we honored primary reality as primary for the first 97 to 99% of human history, depending upon whether you started Homo habilis or you started Homo sapiens. That's the 97 to 99%. But on the last day of Homo sapiens, we lived in a way that didn't defile primary reality, that didn't despoil primary reality, from 11 o'clock on December 30th until 11:20 p.m. So from midnight on the last day of a 100-year process until 11:20 p.m. And then we started having totalitarian agriculture where it was all about us. We didn't give a hoot about any other species. It's all about us. See, there are sustainable forms of agriculture. It's called permaculture. Or other forms, agroecology, where we live, where we mimic the wisdom of the living world in terms of how we grow food and how we live our lives. And so, but once we get into total human-centeredness, we start self-destructing. To speak in mythic language, we lived in the garden with God and all other species for 97% of our history. And we cast ourselves out of the garden, not by eating, not because our great-great-great-great-grandmother ate an apple, but because we overshot the carrying capacity. We dishonored the sacred limits. We dishonored the grace limits of primary reality. That's a mythic story that's speaking profound truth. It didn't just happen in the past. We are currently overshooting. We take more resources and we exude more waste than the living systems can bear, and that's why things are breaking down. And so, the question then becomes, okay, so who are we? We are life. We are reality. We are part of the body. Where are we in time? We're at this stage, but let's go out another year, 101st year. This is the cosmic 101-year timeline. If you go out another year, that's 140 million years. We're not going to be around. No species, no mammalian species our size lasts more than 10 or 12 million years at most, because an asteroid hits or a supervolcano or something. And so we're not going to last more than probably another 2 weeks on this timeline. That's 6 million years. That we're lucky if we last that long. And then some other species will evolve. Life will continue. All species are loved by God. That's the thing. Love, mammalian love, other kinds of love, it's a part of the nature of reality. So all of that is God's love. All of that is part of God's ways. So who we are, where we are, we're in process, and we get to come home like the prodigal species. Yes, we are in the early stages of the great reckoning, but we're also, hopefully, I believe so, in the great homecoming. The prodigal species, after squandering our inheritance, coming home to God, to reality, coming home to the way things are and always have been, which is sacred living world, a unity of human and biological. So where are we in time? Both that, in process. And where are we in space? We're at the center of the universe, as bizarre as that sounds. It turns out we live in an omnicentric universe where every part of the universe is at the center of the universe. It's fascinating. We're at the center of the creativity of the cosmos, God's creativity. I mean, if you want to know where the universe began, take your hands. Just do it like this. 13.82 billion years ago, the universe began right there, right between your hands. It all comes back to right here, right now, okay? So who are we? Where are we? Why are we? What is our purpose? What is our role? Well, the ancient Christian tradition, the classical Christian theology is our purpose. The purpose of man is to love God and serve God forever. Well, if you have a trivial notion of God, a God that's only up there, out there somewhere, then you can think that we can praise God and trash the environment or treat others in an unjust way, and you're going to be clueless to the fact that that's impossible. When you realize that God is a sacred name for reality, the body of reality, the body of life, then you realize to love God and serve God forever is indeed our purpose, and that includes time. See, here's another thing that we learn from science, what God's revealed through evidence, all forms of evidence, scientific evidence, historic evidence, cross-cultural evidence, and the evidence of our own subjective experience, intersubjective evidence. And what we now know, we don't believe this, we know this, is that every sustainable culture had a personal relationship to the past and a personal relationship to the future. They passed on the wisdom of the past, which was all about how to live in right relationship to primary reality, and held that as sacred so that future generations, it could be passed on faithfully. It's the opposite of the old telephone game where, one person whispers to another person, whispers to another. They did it impeccably. And they could only do it because they personified the past. When people died, they didn't just die. They were the ancestors, and those ancestors were consulted. And future generations were personified. To act in the present with the future, with the seventh generation in mind, isn't just a good idea. To do otherwise is evil. And so that personal relationship to time and nature. So who are we? Where are we? In time and space. Why are we? We are here to serve life, to serve the future, to be a blessing to the future. My own tradition, I pastored 3 Christian churches. Fortunately, I had one of my parishioners in my first church turn me on to the Fillmores and Unity and subscribe me to the Science of Mind. And so I was like, whoa, this is pretty cool, practical Christianity. And so I gained a Unity heart at that time. But the Christian tradition, to be a Christian, it's not about beliefs. It's about knowledge and experience. It's about walking the path of the Christ, walking the path of one willing to sacrifice to be a blessing and a redemptive reality for the future. So loving life and so loving the future that we are willing to sacrifice to do that. And when we do that, when we use less energy, drive less, compost, recycle, fly less, eat less meat, it's not going to save the world, but it's going to help save your soul, and it's going to downshift. One of our friends and mentors in this whole movement John Michael Greer has a book called Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush. We all get to use less energy, drive less, all that stuff. In fact, he's got this LESS, less energy, less stuff, less stimulation. And the amazing thing is we come to a deeper intimacy with God, including all of God's non-human expressions, by doing that. So who are we? Where are we? Why are we? We're here to be a blessing, to be a Christian, a savior of the future, a redeemer of humanity in the midst of hard times. And finally, what matters most? I suggest to you that all the religious traditions of the world unite on this question of ultimately what matters most. Because what matters most are not things. It's not status. It's not any of the things that the world would tell us and the secular systems that are human-centered would tell us. It's relationships, the quality of relationships. One of the greatest ways that you can be a blessing in ways that are a blessing to people now and to the future is to just write out who are the people who have been a blessing to you in your lifetime. Maybe you've never told that second grade teacher. Maybe you've never told that person who did this, that counselor. Maybe you've never told whatever. But write down, actually spend some time in prayer and meditation. Who have been the people that have blessed your socks off? And then communicate to them. Phone, in person, email, handwritten letters. There's nothing more powerful than that. And all you got to do is communicate deep gratitude. And maybe the relationship wasn't, like 100% perfect. Don't even mention any of that other stuff. You're just expressing gratitude. I did this exercise, and coincidentally or providentially, God's timing, I went to my second grade teacher. She was the only teacher. I went to a Catholic grade school. She was the only teacher I could actually remember because she was so awesome. Mrs. Ottman, my second grade teacher. And I went to her. I hadn't talked to her in 4 decades. And it turns out I saw her on Tuesday. She retired on Friday. And we held each other and cried. It will nourish your soul to express gratitude. Attending to what matters most is attending to relationships that matter most. Because in hard times, and make no mistake, we are in hard times. 2019 could very well be much more challenging than previous years. Now, probably not for Houston, given the immensity of the suffering you all experienced with the hurricane just a couple years ago. But nonetheless, because there's less ice in the Arctic, we're seeing more intense sunlight, we're seeing crazier weather patterns, and we're very likely to see more intense wildfires, more intense droughts, more intense floods. Hopefully you never experienced anything more intense on that. But nonetheless, we are in hard times. And so the relationships, the gratitude, how to stay in a place. That's what Unity does better than any other religious group that I know of, which is the principles of unity aren't like a slot machine. If I just have the right thoughts, boom, man, the universe is going to give me all kinds of blessings. No, it's that if I have hearts and mind, if my mind and heart is aligned with reality, then I get to be a blessing to anyone and everyone that I'm in communication with, because I'm not freaking out as things go bad, because I know that I co-create my reality, my experience of reality, by what I tell myself and how I feel. So it puts us in the better position to be Christians, blessings to others by having that, because we're going to need that in a hard time. Again, it's that Torok Maktao. The tribes are coming together as spiritual warriors, warriors of love. Because life is going to do, our systems that are not aligned with God's ways are going to collapse. That's happening. So how do we be a blessing in that world? So know who you are, where you are in time and space. You're at the center of the universe, and you're in a process that will continue long after our species will go extinct. Connie sometimes says, she's not a gambling woman, but she sometimes says that even if we destroy ourselves and take 90% of the other species down with us, she said her money is on raccoons to be the next self-reflexive intelligence, the next creature that comes to know that it knows. Yeah. So we can trust the process. My faith, my trust is in evolution and ecology. My trust is in life. And I'm not afraid of death. And I think for all of us to be at peace with our mortality and our collective mortality, and be committed to being Christians, saviors of the future, blessings to humanity. We are the redemptive force. So know who you are, where you are, why you are, and what matters most are our relationships. Amen.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.